Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for everyone for being here today. So, all of us know how important it is to put consumers at the center of everything we do as manufacturers and retailers. But it's worth remembering that there are over 1 trillion reasons why we should do that. We believe this year that consumers will spend over $1 trillion on tech and consumer goods across the world, and that's bigger than the equivalent of the gross domestic product of Switzerland and Austria combined. So that's a huge, huge number, and one that we all need to be really, 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 really aware of. We are seeing a slight drop versus last year, but pretty much flat. Let's look at how that breaks down across the different categories that we're seeing. So what you will see is a slight drop in telco spend, but telco still takes the lion's share of the wallet in 2019. Where we're seeing some significant growth is in the small domestic appliance area. So what we're seeing is some categories moving from upgrade to replacement model, which we've already kind of seen in TV and laptop, but we're now beginning to see in smartphone. And then we're seeing a real growth in what I would call lifestyle enablers. That's things like robot vacuum cleaners, it's things like smoothie makers, it's coffee machines, everybody knows food and drink is eminently Instagrammable, just below kind of cats and dogs. And we're all really very, very lifestyle focused these days. And that leads me on to the kind of theme of the presentation, which is really to take a look at a kind of typical day in the life of a modern consumer and how that will help us to take better insights from a marketing and sales perspective. So the first thing to say, I suppose, is that there is no typical day for a consumer anymore. It's quite interesting that in the UK, 30% of adults skip at least one meal a day in favor of snacking. And how we shop, how we consume media, how we do everything in the modern environment is absolutely in that same vein. We are multitasking, we are moving from one thing to another. The concept of what would historically be called work-life balance is really no longer a reality. We are now just talking about life. We are constantly connected to our friends while we're at work, and we're constantly connected to work in the evenings and while we're at home. 90% of smartphone users are checking their phones within 10 minutes of getting up. And it's clear that the smartphone remains that digital hub around which this ecosystem revolves. But what's really interesting, and I think we see it here today in the Innovation Hall, is whether as we move to IoT and we move to 5G, whether that will continue to be the case. Will we continue to use the smartphone as a proxy for our interaction with the world, or will we interact directly with the environment itself? That's perhaps a topic for another day, but a really, really interesting one. And I think as you look around the hall today, you'll see a lot of interesting opportunities and tools that may change that. So this modern consumer who's skipping his breakfast but taking pictures of his lunch, the key insight is that as we look today, consumers are valuing experiences more than possessions. And that's where we talk about the importance of the experience economy. It's clear that we've moved from what was in technology a feature-focused world, what does my product do, to a benefit-focused world, what problem does it solve, to now an environment where we want to know, how does it make me feel? How does the product make me feel? You know, benefits are practical, but the experience is sensory, and we need to think about that as we market and sell our products as manufacturers and retailers in this modern world. And that doesn't mean that we don't have significant opportunities. It just means we need to look at how we market things slightly differently and make sure those features are tied to experiences. And this has different ramifications in different categories. This rich experience is built around what we would consider at GfK 3 key pillars, those of performance, simplification, and premium. That's about, does it deliver a rich experience? Does it make my life easier? And does it kind of pamper me? You know, is it a little bit of the me? Does it make me feel better about myself that I've got this cool new product? So let's have a look at how this breaks down in some of the categories. The other thing to talk about is that What we focused on, as I said, in some of the areas we're seeing a lack of growth, is where we move from an upgrade to a replacement model. But we still see that 36% of consumers are upgrading working products because they're not happy with the one they've got. So although we are seeing categories slow down in terms of innovation, we are still seeing a huge opportunity here for upgrade. And this is because there is a gap between the promised experience and the experienced experience, if you like, that the consumers are seeing as they move through these new technologies. And there is a strong relation between these experience and between the product feature trends. The smartphone is an interesting one because the reality is that the use cases for the smartphone over the last few years haven't significantly changed. They are still about creating, consuming, and sharing content. And really it's about how we better enable that experience through innovation and through design change. So what you can see is that the camera technology remains important, and we talk about, but we're not talking about megapixels now. We're talking about software processing. We're talking about bokeh effects. We're talking about how we can change and share in a more realistic and more artistic way. The other thing that's really important is that we, as I mentioned, we're tying features to benefits to experiences, but the same feature may have a very different benefit for different segments of your market. So if we look here at the smartphone space and we see the growth of onboard storage. Now, is that growth of onboard storage led by your innovators who want more applications, who want more applications and more content? Is it led by your laggards who really don't understand and trust cloud-based services yet, and so they just want more things stored locally on the device rather than remotely? Or is it really just a result of design change as more and more manufacturers move away from including onboard memory card slots in their phones? So there's a myriad of different ways to read how these features are utilized by the consumers. The other thing is to say, and really interesting one here, is the significant growth in screen size. I say this to someone who was working at Samsung when we launched the first Galaxy Note, and I was told by every carrier in Europe that we would never sell a phone with a 5.3-inch screen. So it was just a crazy size. And now here we are with everything with 6+ inch screens, and a significantly larger screen ratio as well in terms of the front, whereas we've gone from 65 to 85% plus. So if we look at how that breaks down across a number of different categories, we can see that we're in different places in the innovation cycle within different categories. The PC market is now very much a replacement more than an upgrade market, and that's primarily because the complexity of software that needs to be installed locally has really very much plateaued. But where we do see a growth is in the gaming space. So we do see some gamers moving across from desktop PC to laptop PC now that the laptops are able to support the performance that's required, and you can see that in terms of the key feature benefits here. The smartphone ones I've already talked about. The MDA ones are actually quite similar to the smartphone ones. It's about being able to do more in the same size footprint. So whether that's fitting more things in your fridge or fitting more things in your washing machine, there is a drive towards the convenience and the ability to do more with the same. The TV one is quite interesting, and one that I will come on to in a bit more detail. What we are seeing is a bit of a race to the bottom in this in terms of pricing, particularly with 4K, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment. So let's talk about this consumer a little bit more. So he or she has skipped their breakfast, they've taken photos of their lunch, and they agree that it's very important to treat themselves on a regular basis. And this is where I see quite an interesting kind of shift between what I would call product and experience. This is where the experience and the product merge. The product becomes the experience, and this is where premium becomes really, really important. So we can see that the product, the element of consumerism, whether it's the purchase journey, whether it's the product, is a part of that experience itself. And as such, the customer's favorite treat is to buy premium. And you can see the areas where we're seeing growth, although I may question the fact whether anyone's buying a vacuum cleaner to treat themselves. What we are seeing is that where innovation falters, design can pick up the slack. So if you look at the ultra-thin laptop, the design from a vacuum cleaner perspective. I would argue, as I said, the smartphone display size is really a design issue, because that's really about being able to fit a larger screen in the same size environment. And I would say that the OLED TV piece is of course a technological advantage, but it's also enabling a different design language and a more premium look and feel for the consumer. So what we are seeing is a real growth in this area, even where the overall category is beginning to drop away. So that is where it becomes really, really important to look beyond feature and price. 4K is a really good example. As you walk around the show today, you will see 8K TVs, but what you will also know, if you're a 4K TV owner, is that from a broadcast perspective in many markets, 4K TV or 4K content is still relatively scarce. Despite that, we have already, as an industry, commoditized the feature from a hardware perspective. Where 5 years ago, we could charge a huge premium of 4K, we are now in a situation where we have twice the number of brands delivering 4K, and the premium is to a point where we're now at a sub €1,000 price point, and almost 70% of all TVs sold this year will have a 4K capability. So that leads us on to which levers we can pull in a commoditized market. And there are still significant things that we can do if we want to avoid a race to the bottom. Of course, we can load on new product features, but that's challenging when our key product features are still not really delivering benefits, as you could argue potentially with 4K. Price becomes a self-defeating argument, so you need to focus on product brand where you can. Now, it's easier said than done, right? Creating and establishing and maintaining a brand is incredibly difficult. However, in the digital environment in which we live now, creating and establishing consumer awareness is a lot easier than it has been in the past. Equally, it's a lot easier to lose that brand loyalty and lose that brand goodwill if you have problems, because your social media acts as an amplifier of anything that goes wrong. But what we see in the German TV market is that 24% of the total value of the category comes from brand. What's even more interesting about that 24% is that 70% of that 24% is owned by 3 brands. So there is a huge number of brands still coming, new entrants into the market, but really that brand premium is owned by a relatively small number of manufacturers, and that's been pretty consistent for some time now. So we've talked about our consumer. He's had a great day. He's probably a bit tired because he didn't eat his breakfast, but he's still online, he's still connected, and 41% of people need the shops to be available to them on a 24/7 basis. So we really are in the era of borderless shopping, and in fact the process of shopping becomes a part of that experience that I talked about earlier, and it's incredibly important, whether we're a bricks and mortar retailer or an online retailer, to take that in mind. So anytime on any device, we are seeing the urge for convenience blur those channels. And this is interesting, because what we're seeing in Europe is that the growth of online channel for bricks and mortar retailers is growing significantly faster than the growth of pure play online. We're also seeing there is a danger within that 28% of online shoppers purchased a product at another retailer on their smartphone while they were in a store. So as a retailer, you have consumers who are using your shops as a showroom, and then they're going to buy that product somewhere else. So it's really important that as a bricks and mortar retailer, you start to look at what is your value add. Are you offering extended warranty? Are you offering training? Are your store staff engaging? Are they delivering a personalized experience? It's been easy to deliver a personalized experience in the online space for a long time, but that now comes with its own concerns, and we see consumers who are worried about the amount of data being used to deliver that online personalized experience. And in a bricks and mortar, there is an opportunity here for bricks and mortar retailers to use that trust, build on that trust, use some of the same tricks as the online retailer, click and collect, etc., to really grow that share, and we're seeing an opportunity for them to thrive in that environment. We're also, of course, seeing seasonality completely redefined. Black Friday, everybody knows about. We see Prime Day make huge differences in terms of seasonality. And the interesting one here, I find, coming from manufacturer historically before I worked at GfK, is how much of your powder do you keep dry for Christmas? how much of that consumer wallet remains available to you as a manufacturer or a retailer if you don't go big for Black Friday? If you don't sacrifice your margins, what's left for you? That's where, from a GfK perspective, we believe we can really help in terms of that predictive ability. Because in the modern environment with consumers who are completely omni-channel, far less loyal, far more open to opportunity, having an understanding of integrated consumer insights is incredibly important. That could be as simple as monitoring your sellout performance, understanding where you are, not on a monthly basis, not on a quarterly basis, but on a weekly or even potentially on a daily basis. How do you understand and improve your sales performance on the ground, at a store level if necessary? How are your promotions performing? How do you understand really what your consumer's buying behavior is? As I mentioned earlier, you may have one feature that has a different benefit to every consumer segment. How do you market successfully to that segment through the right channels and then put the right price to that? And when do you put the right price and where do you put the right price? Is there a time at which you have to go promotion, a time you go price, a time you go brand? When do you invest in your brand and when do you invest in driving price down? And that becomes a hugely difficult predictive job for you as a retailer or as a manufacturer. That is, of course, where hopefully, this is where the sales bit comes in. Hopefully some of the information was interesting, but where the sales bit comes in, from a GfK perspective, we believe that we can help you with some of that predictive understanding of what your consumers are going to do, when they're going to do it, and where your best opportunities are to maintain your margin and deliver that experience that the consumer needs. Beyond the feature, beyond the benefit, how does it make your consumer feel? Our stand is just over there, my last bit of promo. And I'd like to thank everyone for your time this afternoon and wish you all the best for the rest of the IFA show. Thank you.